With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Lamed Gimel. Yoma Daf Lamed Gimel is going to expound. It's going to be the Gemara on something that we should say every day in davening, before we start Hoidu, at the end of Karbanos. Abaye have misader seder hamarocha mishma de Gemara va'aliba da abashol. That Abaye would list the order of the Mizbeach service, beginning with the daily service. And I know that if someone were to ask you, okay, exactly what was the first Avodas Hayom? Well, based on what we learned until now, we can argue that, well, listen, the first lottery after they annulled the foot race was for the Trumas Hadeshin. But for some reason that we'll learn inside the Tosfos, we don't begin with the Trumas Hadeshin in Abaye's order. We begin with the preparation of the Ma'aracha Gedola. Now, the preparation of the large pyre, aside of what we mentioned previously, that we needed to organize the top of the Mizbeach, we needed to put the ashes in the Tapuach, to make a Seder there. We also would put a lot of wood on the large pyre, especially Bizman Bayesheni, where we no longer had that type of Eish Min HaShamayim, even though we learned in the Gemara it was present, but it didn't consume the karbanos. There was a lot of wood that was put during the organization of the large pyre. And as we're going to go through the Seder, and then there was the secondary pyre, from which the coals that needed to be taken to the inside of the Heichel, coals that were placed on the inner golden altar, upon which at some point the Ketairas was offered, those hot coals were not taken from the large pyre, but they were taken from what we call the Maracha Shniyah. And we're going to be going through first the Seder of Abaya. He said it in the name of tradition, even though the whole daf today is going to be, as we do in Torah Shebal Peh and the Gemara, that we try to find a link between the oral Torah and the scripture. So we're going to go through the steps of the Seder. We're going to find reasons why some of them will be scripturally based, some of them will be based on Sfarim, why the Seder is as we have it via Gemara, via tradition. And Va'aliba da Abashol was what we already spoke out, Lekula Alma, the preparation of the 5 Neiros, the Hatavas Chomish Neiros, which other than the Shitas HaRambam that understands Hatavas Chomish Neiros as actually lighting the menorah in the morning. That's uniquely the Shita of the Rambam, that the menorah was lit at night and in the morning. But everyone else, beginning with the Rashba, that tells the Rambam, no, there's Hadlakas HaNeiros, right in the afternoon, late afternoon. Hatavas HaNeiros is, as we have been learning, is the preparing, the cleaning out the old wick and the ashes and the residue of the oil, and placing the fresh oil and the new wick. The preparation of the neiros were done in the morning. And also, as we learned, Lukula Almo, the Kohen did not prepare all of the 7 lamps at the same time, but there was 5, a break, not just a break in Zman, a break with an Avodah, and then the preparation of the subsequent final 2 neiros. Question is, what Avodah was placed in between the 5 and the 2? That is where we have a Machlekes Rabbanan and Abashol. The Rabbanan hold that the Ketairas is in between. Abashol subscribes to the Shita, as we'll learn in today's daf, that the Ketairas was done dafka after all of the 7 candles. And we already quoted the Maimon from the Alter Rebbe, that in the Beis HaMikdash you had the 3 types of fires. The fire of the outer altar, which was a noisy fire. It is there that the animal, which had in it fats and mayim, matzmichim kol minei tainug, was clashing with the godly fire. And one has to win over the other. The concept of hiskafia. From there we graduate to the second type of fire, which was the menorah. There it's a pleasant fire, it's a calm fire. Actually the fuel is lending itself to be burnt up. That's the menorah. After the menorah, yet on the highest madreg is the ketairas. Because even by the menorah, nevertheless there is the yid that's connecting to God. All of the yid. Hisapcha. The godly soul, the animal soul. But it's 2 entities. And that's why you need a wick. Because fire and oil, the oil would put out the fire. The unique fire of the Ketairas is that the fire and the fuel is the same thing. And La'abashol, perfectly, that only begins after the Avodah of the menorah. So now, you have to be mafsik between the 5 and the 2. Abashol holds that the Dam HaTamid wasn't between those 2, as we read every day in davening. Truth be told, that in the Seder of Abaya, have a Mesader, there's another step that Abaya is citing with only one of 2 shittas and Tanoim, and we'll get to that later, the Bazichen, Musafin, Bazichen. But the Va'aliba, the Abu Shol, is about the Dam HaTamid being in between the 5 and the 2 Hatavas Hanedasin, and going through the reasons for every Seder, we're going to come to one point where there isn't a custom-made pasuk or svara benegei kachim, but we're going to introduce or bring here the concept, which is a generic concept, that ein ma'avirin al hamitzvahs. We're not supposed to pass over a mitzvah. Even technically, if there's a mitzvah right in front of you and there's another mitzvah, even if you put them together, one is not, so to say, one should not inherently be before the other, but simply because you are by this one, do this one. We're going to see how this applies to the statement that the Rava says that batfilin abure dera'a atoitefta asur, passing over the hand for the head is prohibited. And we're going to learn, God willing, 3 interpretations from the Rishonim. Rashi, 1, and Tosfos brings 2 shitas how to interpret it. The pshat of Rashi is pashat, you put on the hand before your head, because your hand, the right hand, which you use to put on the tefillin on the left hand, is closer to the hands than to your head. Ein maviran ala mitzvahs. We're going to be speaking about the importance of the separation of the 5 and the 2. And really, it's a machlekes amoyroim whether you are mechuyev to place an avodah in between. Obviously, we subscribe to that you have to, and much more. It's pashat a gavaldik kedaf, because we say this every day. And here we're going to have a biur on everything that is included in the daily davening. We are beginning Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph at the end of the 3rd line. And just to note that the nusach in our Gemara is Abaye Mesader Marocha. In the Alter Rebbe Siddur, we say, Abaya have misader seder hamarocha. And just to speak out what the Achronim talk out, that when you say it the way we do, Abaye, really you should make a comma and then say the word hava. Because the yud, the last letter in Abaya's name, and the next word hava, if they are going to be mamished, besmichus, it's going to yud kei vavke, you're going to be saying inadvertently, but God's name, and we're not allowed to do that. So, Enoch, that's the reason perhaps why some don't have the Girsa Hava. We do, Abaya, Hava, Misader. Again, we say Seder HaMaracha. Here, we're going to read the Gemara, Abaya, Misader, Maracha. There's a Seder. And the source, is all of the Torah is Mishma de Gemara. We know it because that's what we got from Moshe Rabbeinu, who got it from Sinai, from the Oibishter. And there is going to be some steps that are not going to be L'Kula Alma. So this Seder is only according to Abu Shol, as we spoke out. The Ketores is after all the 7 Neiros. The Hafsaka between the 5 and the 2 is Dafka, the Dam HaTamid. And now let's begin. But before we begin, look inside Tosfos. So Tosfos wonders that why will the first step be Ma'arach Gedoyla, Tema, Li, says Tosfos, Amay Leka Choshev, Nami Trumas Hadeshen. Tahava Nami Tchilas Havoida the Yoma. Answers Tosfos v'tzarach loymar mishum dezim nin magdimen oisem hashmoyra reshoino, as we learned in the right Daf Chav Beis, that on Yom Tiv the Trumas Hadeshen was done before midnight. On Yom Kippur it's done michatzois. And l'shitas Tosfos, whenever the Trumas Hadeshen was done earlier, there was a hefsek between the Trumas Hadeshen and the actual setting up the Maracha Gedoyla and the Maracha Shniya. So because of that, says Tosfos, it's not counted in the Seder. And don't forget that the Seder of setting up the large pyre wasn't done by the crack of dawn. No. They began before the crack of dawn, always, because we wanted the Shechita to begin as soon as possible. Not earlier, but Barak Barkoi, right? See, Allah Barkoi, or whatever Tana we're going to subscribe to, at the moment you could, we did the Shechita. Everything needed to be readied before the Shechita, as we're learning. So it was not done when it was already Alois HaShachar, but it was the beginning of the Seder Hayom. And once we started the preparation of the Maracha Gedoyla, every step we're going to learn here will be one right after the other. Maracha Gedoyla, back inside the Gemara, comes before the Maracha Shniya Shel Ketores. Now, as we are seeing over here, there were 2 pyres. The large pyre, upon which the Chalavim and the Eivarim of the Oila, right, and the Pedarim, whatever needed to be burnt on the Mizbeach was burnt from the animal, Dafka, on the Maracha Gedoyla. Mincha, a Maracha Gedoyla. However, there was a second pyre, nothing was put on it as it was on the outer altar. But since we needed to bring the Ketores on the Mizbeach Hazav, and the Ketores was put on coals, And like we spoke out, the ketaitis itself became a flame, but it was put on coals. Where did those fiery coals come from? They came from the second pyre that was prepared now. So they would light it up, and the coals would become red hot, and then they would take from the maracha shniya whatever was needed to burn upon it, the ketaitis, into the heichel. As we'll see soon, if there wasn't enough wood to make a maracha shniya, we were allowed to take the coals for the ketaitis from the maracha gedola. But ideally, maracha gedola, maracha shniya. Important to note, and I will learn about that later. Let's just quote right now Shitas Rebbe Yossi, that there was a third pyre that was in the one through which we fulfilled the Eish Tamid Tukad Ala Mizbeach Leisichba. So it's not that Abaya is excluding the fact that there was a third one, but the seder of what was set up right now, Maracha Gedola, Maracha Shniya Shel Ketairis. Now, to point out the following, we don't say that the Maracha Shniya came after the Maracha Gedola. We're saying that Maracha Gedola came before the Maracha Shniya. And every single step in this seder, the way we frame it is not that 2 is after 1, but 1 is before 2. And 2 is before 3, and that's very significant because the whole Gemara will be why. Why is one more than the other? And it's going to be speaking up the virtue of that which takes precedence, and it's never going to be speaking down the secondary one. No, it's the emphasis is not on the relative insignificance of the second one, because there is never insignificance. We're speaking about Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. Eloma, there has to be a reason why one is before the other. And we'll see the reasons again throughout today's daf. Maracha Shniya Shel Ketairis comes before L'Sidur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. And this is extremely important that we have in the beginning of Parshas Tzav, the pasuk that says, Ubi'er Oleha HaKoyin Eitzim Babayker Babayker. The Eitzim that has to be burnt, aside of putting a lot of wood on the Maracha Gedolah, when you're doing the Seder of the Maracha Gedolah, but still the last step was fulfilling this positive commandment of putting Dafka to Gizrei Eitzim. I know in the Seder we write Gizrei, here we'll see it's Gizirei, it means logs of wood. So that, interestingly, so it's not that you did the Maracha Gedolah and you did it all the way until the end. You did the Maracha Gedolah. You did not do the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. You did the Maracha Shniya Shel Ketairis. Then you went back and you put the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim on the Maracha Gedolah. And then V'sidur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim takes precedence to the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi. As we spoke out, the Ketairis is offered on the Mizbeach HaPnim, on the golden altar that the Ketairis was offered there yesterday. And there is some residue remains from yesterday's Ketairis. So before you do the new Avodah, you have to clear off that which remained from yesterday's Avodah. That has to be completely cleared off. That's the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi. And if you remember in the Daf of the Miracles that was taken to that eastern tile, there was a place to the east of the ramp upon which the Trumas HaDeshen was placed, the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi was placed, all of the residue of yesterday's menorah was placed, and the nest, that even though it was the stone floor was stone marble, it went through the stone. It was nivla in the Ritzpas Hazara. But the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi comes before the Hatavas Chamesh Neidos. Like we mentioned, it's not all the 7 together, 5. Vatavas Chamesh Neidos, this is the Abba Shol, comes before the Damatamid. The Damatamid is that which comes before the Hatavas Shtei Neidos. Only after you finish all of the 7 candles, not lighting again, Rambam lighting according to all the other Rishonim, the preparation, Vatavas Shtei Neidos, Koidem L'Ketairis. That is when the Ketairis was brought. The Ketairis is before the Evadim. So let's go back to what we learned. Remember in the Payasheni, so of course the first winner was the Shoichet and then the Zoydek, etc. But remember, then by the carbon, by the lamb, there were now 9 more Kohanim. So the Evadim were really brought up by 5 or by 6, right? 5 for the limbs itself, and the 6th one was for the Kirbayim, for the intestines. And right after that, the Evadim lemincha, the mincha is the minchas nesachim, that which comes along with the carbon tamid. And even though the minchas nesachim is really flour and wine, but we're mafsik between the flour and the wine. Once we bring the flour, so then there was the chavite kohen gadol that has to be brought twice every day, which is also made out of flour. So from the mincha comes before the chavitim. Again, always emphasizing not what comes after, but that which comes before. Always speak up the maila of one, never the disadvantage of the other. And mincha lachavitim, and then the chavitim l'nesachim. If you remember the nesachim, that's the 9th kohen. Remember, the final one from the daily 13 from the second pious. And now let's go into Shabbos. So Shabbos, Nesachim, came before Musaf. After you finished the entire Tamid Shal Shachar, last step was the Nesachim, now comes the Musaf. Musafim comes before Bazichin. This is important to note, again, that there is a machlekes Tanoim, whether Musafim is before the Bazichin. The Bazichin were the two spoons that were sitting on the table the whole week, together with the lechem apanim, and they are actually considered part of the lechem apanim, and they are the mater for the kohanim's eating of the lechem apanim. It was now that it was offered up on the mizbeach, and a bazichin was before the Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim. Now the key is that everything needed to be before the Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim. Nothing was allowed to be brought after the Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim. I know that there are exceptions, right? We came from Masechtas Pesachim. The one exception will be the Korban Pesach, but the rule is that nothing is offered on the outer altar after the Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim Shenemar. And now we're going to quote a pasuk in the beginning of Parshas Tzav. In this pasuk, let me just read some of it by heart. The pasuk says like this: Ubi'er Oleha hakoyin eitzim baboiker baboiker. The kohen should burn oleha. Oleha means on the big marachim. Every morning, not every morning, once. Baboiker baboiker the eitzim. Then it says v'orach oleha ha'oila. Second time oleha. And then at the end it says v'hikted. That's what we're quoting. V'hikted oleha, on it bring the chelvei hashlamim. Now this oleha is superfluous, and this oleha is teaching us that on the Marachi Gedoyla, after you first brought the oil of Archu, allow ha'oila, the oil comes first, then everything else is brought, including the fats of shlamim, of all the other karbanis. Only after the Tamid Shal Shachar do we allow other things to be brought. And from that we extrapolate that after the Tamid Shal Bein Arbaim, nothing else is allowed to be brought. That's called the asay of hashlama. And let's read the words and say, on the Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim, hashlim kol hakarbonos kulam. That's going to be the end. That's going to be the end, because only after the Tamid Shel Shachar can we bring aleha the chelvei hashlamim. End of Abaya Hava Mesader, and now it's Gavaldik Kedaf. We're going to go step by step by step. We have a Gemara, we're Makabel. Now we'll do the best we could to find either a scriptural source, that's the whole kavan of the Gemara, to be meshalish, to connect the oral with the written, or to find the svarim. So Amar Mar, the master taught us that Marachi Gedoyla Kedemus LaMarachi Shniya Shel Ketoides. Let's start with that, Minola. Why do we say that? So answers the Gemara the Tanya, and this is the beginning of the pasuk that we just quoted in Sav. Hi ha'olam al moikta. Al moikta means that's brought on the flame. Moikta is alluding to a pyre, which is on the mizbeach kol halayla. So the word moikta, which is written first in the pasuk, is Marachi Gedoyla. Then it says, "Ve'eish hamizbeach tukad boy," will be a flame on top of it. Again, mentioning flame. This is alluding to the smaller, to the second marach. It was also smaller. Moikta, the first, the larger. Tukat, the smaller one, from which normally we would take the coals for the ketayros. So in the seder of the pasuk, moikta is mentioned before tukat. So follow the Seder HaKosef. The Marachi Gedoyla is before the Marachi Shniya. Asks the Gemara ve'epachano, and like Rashi says, yes, that the Seder in the pasuk is the Moikta before the Tukad, but let's just go to what we learned yesterday. I know that it's an exception, but there are exceptions. What did we learn yesterday? That Vayikra Tez Zayin Psukim Chav Gimel Chav Dalet, what actually happened was Chav Dalet happened before Chav Gimel. There are times that the pasuk is written out of the Seder. Now, why would we say that this goes out of the Seder? We'll see in a few lines. That one could argue that there's an additional Kedusha, an advantage and superiority to the Maracha that will be taken inside the Heichel. The first Maracha, the big Maracha, none of it goes inside the Heichel under normal circumstances. So the Gemara rejects, no, we're not going to go out of the order. Mistabra, that the Maracha Gedoyla is Adifa when you compare them to each other. Why? It doesn't go inside. Shekain kaparasa meruba, which means that since almost all the karbanos, many of them come to bring about a kapara, they are brought dafke on the Marachi Gedoyla. We're not, God forbid, minimizing the ketaydas that's offered on the wood that was put on the Marachi Shniya, but go to numbers. So kapara meruba, beautiful, closer. Holier doesn't mean greater. You know what's greater? That which brings a larger amount of kapara. Beautiful. We can argue maracha shniya difa shekei machnisim emeno lifnim. Well, maybe that which goes closer, even if it's not bringing more kapara, should be considered superior. And even though it's going to be going against the Seder and the Pasuk, still it should come first. Afilo hachem. Let's go with Sfara. Kaparasa meruba adifa. Sfara. Kaparasa meruba versus the concept of machnisim emeno lifnim. Achsidish Gemara. A chassid would want to be closer to the Rebbe. It's holier, but where's the kavana to go out there? Even the maila that you are attributing to the maracha shniyah is not a value that the maracha gedayla does not have in potential, because if there would not be enough wood for the maracha shniyah, miloi ma'ayel me maracha gedayla, so it's also connected to the heichel. Even when you do have a maracha shniyah, you have both mailas. Gewaldig. Now, next step, maracha shniyah shal ketoides comes before the siddur shnei gizriyetz, and the Gemara wants to know minolon. Where do we have a source for that? So the same pasuk that we quoted from Tzav, the first Elyahu, ubier Elyahu hakoyin eitzim haboiker baboiker. Now on it is implying on it and not on something else. That will be challenged in a moment. But let's go that the Elyahu is saying the eitzim should be on this one, not on the other one, which implies that there is another one. Elyahu v'lo al chaverta, which is michlal the isla chaverta. Says the Gemara, one second. Elyahu maybe is not implying anything. If the Torah would not have written Elyahu, then maybe we would have thought that we have to put the two gezirei eitzim near the marachim, on the side, on the floor of the mizbeach. No, Elyahu's written, put it on it. Why are you saying no? Elyahu is like extra, so it's coming to imply on it and not on the other one. Is the charai that there is already another one, which means you have to first prepare the maracha rishayna, then you prepare the maracha shniya, then you put the woods on the gedola. But how do you know that this was done after the maracha shniya? So the Gemara says, no, it's extra because the pasuk really says 3 times Elyahu. Now one Elyahu, the last one was already used up for the Elyahu Hashleim, the Asay of Hashleim, means normally nothing is brought after the Talmud Shel Bein Ho'arbayim. But this and for the Gemara, aside of the one that we mentioned above, there's 2. Today Elyahu Ksiv, so one of them is extra, and the extra one is used to teach you the limud. Elyahu v'lo al chaverta, gewaldig, michlal de ikar chaverta. Next, siddur shnei gizirei eitzim or gizirei eitzim comes before the dishum mizbeach hapnimi. Va'af al gav. Even though the hachiksiv regarding the gizirei eitzim or the gizirei eitzim, it says ba boiker. Now, boiker means early, and when the Torah repeats the word boiker twice, ba boiker, it means even earlier. So actually, one of the ways that the Torah is being merames, that one step has to precede other step, is if this step has in it 2 baboikers. Follow that logic. If there would be 3 baboikers, it would mean even earlier. So let's start. Baboiker is written by the 2 blocks of wood. Now, when it comes to the dishum mizbeach hapnimi, you can argue, says the Gemara, the Torah also writes baboiker. Now, chavre, let's remember what we're learning right now for Amud Beis. There's a pasuk that Rashi quotes that's towards the ends of Parshas Tetzaveh. And I'm reading inside Rashi the Lashon HaKosov. Baboiker beheitivoi es haneiros yaktireno. The pshat of that pasuk, baboiker is regarding the hatavas haneiros. Baboiker is regarding the ketoides. Very nice. But as the Rashi brings down that there is a drush, that this pasuk is also alluding to the clearing off of the mizbeach hapnim. So we're using the baboiker from Parshas Tetzaveh. We have to remember this. Sai for the Atavas HaNeiros. It's going to be done earlier than others because it says twice baboiker. Sai beneged the ketoides, again the aktireno. Also regarding the dishum mizbeach hapnimi. So asks the Gemara. Well, listen, the dishum mizbeach shnei gezirei eitzim twice baboiker. By the dishum mizbeach hapnimi, we are using the words baboiker in the end of Parshas Tetzaveh. So they're both equal, double baboiker. So why are you saying that first the shnei gezirei eitzim and then the dishum mizbeach hapnimi? Maybe the dishum mizbeach hapnimi should come before the placing of the 2 blocks of wood. So now comes a svara. Answers the Gemara. Guys, this is very important. Machshir means something that is done as a preparation for something else. By default, a machshir has to come before. You're being machshir to something else. Now, I know that the Shnei Gezidei Eitzim, which the Gemara is going to right away challenge, is really being put on the Mizbeach HaChitzoin. The Mizbeach HaChitzoin is not going to be used ideally for the coals, for the Ketoides. But we are now linking the two Gezidei Eitzim as a machshir for the Ketoides. Now, the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi is also a machshir for the Ketoides, but it's a negative machshir, because you're clearing out. But when you're going to be making the coals to burn the Ketoides, that's the wood, that's considered a machshir. And if you have two avodas that you look inside the Chumash, babayker, 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 babayker. So there's no scriptural upside. So we use the Sfarim. And the Sfara is machshir adif. We're going to use this on Amid Beis. Hold on. Frek the Gemara, but 1 second. I'm sorry. Machshir mai ninu shnei gezidei eitzim. No, didn't you just say that the two gezidei eitzim were put on the Maracha Gedela Asli? And the machshir is the Maracha Shniya Shel Ketoides. Now we're moided that the Maracha Shniya comes before the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi. The question is, why don't we say Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi should be koidem to two gezidei eitzim? So the Gemara gives a few answers. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, answer number 1, even though the two Gezidei Eitzim were put on the Maracha Gedela, since it's Eitzim, Shum Eitzim, it has the name of Eitzim. And Eitzim, from which comes the Ketoides, will always be viewed as a machshir, and a machshir should be the first step. Answer number 2, Ravina Amar, Hoyel, V'hischel B'Maracha Goymer. Another answer. B'chlal, there's a rule, you begin, finish. And really, if that will be the logic, so then Abayish, the Seder should have been the Maracha Gedoyla and Shnei Gezidei Eitzim, and then the Maracha Shniya. But for that we had a limud, right? Elyahu v'lo al chaverta mechlal deika chaverta. So we had no option. But finish the Maracha Gedoyla. So that's why it took precedent to the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi, even though based on Psukim they're both equal. Babayker, 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 babayker. Rav Ashi Amar, again, what we had before, I loy mashkach eitzim l'maracha shniya, mi loy me'ay l'maracha gedoyel, mi maracha gedoyel, yes we would. These two eitzim could actually be the machshir to the Ketoides. It takes precedent to Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi, which is a negative machshir, let's say, but not a positive machshir. Now, next step, Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi comes before the Hatavas Chamish Neiris. How do you know that from? My Tamas. So for this, Abaya says, Gemara Gemirno Svara Lo Yodano. I have no idea. Not a pasik, not a svara. And maybe because of this step, which is the only step to which Abaya says he doesn't know a svara, that's why we say that Abaya, we say, Hava Masada Seder HaMaracha, Mishma de Gemara. Emphasizing that something over here is only because Azoy does. Azoy and Azoy is the inyan, not because we have some sort of source for it. Now, what we're going to learn in the next step is something that Abaye won't even disagree with. Rav is going to give a svara, but it's not directly related for the seder of the daily preparation, the daily avodah. Abaye didn't find something specific to the Seder of the Avodas Hayoim. Rava says, listen, even though there is nothing specific concerning the Avodas Hayoim on the Mizbeach, but let's now connect this to a broader rule, and that is Kidei Shlakish. The Omer Ish Lakish, right, as Reb Shimon Lakish says, a klal ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. What's ein mavirin ala mitzvahs, guys? Let's look inside the Rashi in the Amit. The Mechilta says that when it says in the Chumash, Ushmartem es hamatzois, Pshat, don't allow it to become chametzik. Drush, Mechilta, Kribei, es ha-mitzvahs, guard the mitzvahs. What do you guard? Don't allow mitzvahs to become chametzik. What is chametzik? Chametz is only when you linger. When you wait, it can become chametzik. It becomes old. Don't allow a mitzvah to become old. In other words, don't pass over a mitzvah. Sometimes the Chazal say the lashon by mitzvah habaliyotcha al tachmitzena. Even here, the ein maviran ala mitzvahs, Rashi links loitamten. Don't linger, do it right away. Now, he's giving a practical answer. He's saying that there isn't an inherent upside, maila, to the Dishon HaMazbeach versus to the Hatavas Chamish Neiris. What he is saying is that when the Kohen walked into the Heichel, what did the Kohen encounter first? The Mizbeach HaPnimi. Before physically he encountered the Menorah, as we learn. Let's look inside Daf Lamed Gimel base on the top. That when he entered the Heichel, what happened first? Mizbeach Paga Bereisha. He would encounter the inner altar. So therefore, do the addition on Mizbeach HaPnimi before the Hatavas Chamish Neiros. And the Tanya, Shulchan was B'Tzafin. It was on the north. Now we learned details before. B'chlal, the room of the Heichel, if you're going from east to west, you divide it in half. 40 amas long, divided in half, 20 and 20. In the first 20 amas, there was nothing. All of the Kli Kodesh, which is the Shulchan, the Menorah, and the Mizbeach HaPnimi, were in the inner part. But, as we'll see, the Shulchan wasn't placed at the boundary of the inner 20. It was even more towards the west. How close was it to the northern wall? It was Mashach Mena Koisel Shtei Amos Umerza, 2.5 amos away from the northern wall. In other words, it was 2.5 amos to the south of the northern wall. And why wasn't it mamish leaning on the northern wall? Because since when it came to the Shulchan, not the Menorah, when it came to the Shulchan, whenever we changed the Lechem upon breads, we needed to have Kohanim on both sides. By the Menorah, one Kohen lit it, even according to the Rishonim that hold that the lamps were part of the golden piece of the Menorah. So you couldn't remove it from there. You needed to do the Hatava on it. Well, you walked up the steps and you did it on it. And you only went up one side. The Menorah could have been all the way leaning on the southern wall. The Shulchan was not that way. You needed to have Kohanim on both sides. And how much maneuvering space did they need? 2.5 amos. Once the Shulchan is where it is, east-west, that means it's within the deeper part of the Heichel. Towards the north, but not mamish on the north. It is 2.5 amos south of the northern wall. We made a symmetric placement of the Menorah. Menorah was bedarim. Even though it was not needed, but for it to mirror the Shulchan, it was also Meshulchan and HaKoisel Shtei Amos Umerz. And the Mizbeach Memutza. Memutza means it was in between the north and the south. But don't think that it was aligned. No, but it was a little bit towards the outside. Outside means towards the east. Why? The Gemara is asking on this Braisa, why didn't you place it mamash in between? And the answer is Kivan Dechsivim, according to Pasuk in Truma. The Es Hamanoida Noichach HaShulchan. Noichach means facing. In other words, Be'in and the Chazav Adadi, they have to see each other. So that's why the Mizbeach needed to be placed towards the east. Now you got the answer. So when the Kohen is entering, the Heichel is coming from east to west. Since the Shulchan was a little bit Klape Chutz, he would physically walk by the Mizbeach HaPnimi prior to coming towards the Menorah. That's the answer. So it's not an answer related to the Maila of the Mizbeach HaPnimi versus the Menorah, but yes, it's about this general rule of Ein Mavir and Ala Mitzvahs. Now, Amar Rava, based on the rule of Reish Lakish, Mamino, Reish Lakish, Abure Dra'a Atoy Tefta, to pass over your Dra'a, your arm, to come to your Tefta, to your head. Don't do that, Asr. What does that mean? So Rashi teaches Pashut, when you put on the tefillin, like we mentioned, let's say most people write with their right hands, which means they put on the tefillin on their left hand. Now, so what hand is putting on my tefillin? My right hand. My right hand is physically closer to my left hand, vis-a-vis it being closer to my head. If I were to put on my tefillin on my head first, then I would be going over my hand to come to my head. Ein mavir and ala mitzvahs. Azoi zogt Rashi. Now look inside the top Tosfos, he has a big problem with it. Abure dra'a atoy tefta perush Rashi lo niech tefillin beroish koidem sheniech tefillin shel yad asur, because to come mavir al mitzvahs tefillin shel yad the paga bereish was raya koidem shel roish. Frag Tosfos Zakosh, I don't understand. According to Rashi, why does he have to bring Reish Lakish? It's wrong to bring Reish Lakish. He's quoting the Gemara in the Nachas Daf Lamed Vav. The Gemara says that when you put on tefillin, maniach shel yad va'achar kach shel reish, why dechsiv? It's a pasuk. It's not a general rule. It's a specific rule. Ukshartom la'ois, first al yodecha, sayin v'aschanan, sayin ekev, sayin in all of the parshas in the Torah, in Parshas Boi. Whenever the Torah speaks about tefillin, the Torah always mentions the hand before the head, right? So that's the kash. So what does it mean? What is Rava adding? So we're going to learn two approaches that Tosfos brings. The first one was from the Rabbeinu Tam in the name of Rabbi Gaon Zatzal. Whole different din. The Aida b'shosha choylitz tefillin umanichon batik. When you put away your tefillin, you put it in a bag. Now nowadays our bags are wide enough that the hand and the head tefillin are put side by side. In the times of these Rishonim, and that's the way he understands, in the times of Chazal, in the times of Rava, then the bags in which people stored their tefillin were narrower and longer. They were certainly narrower. So one tefillin went deeper in the bag and the other one went closer to the front of the bag. So when you put it in the bag, put the head tefillin deeper in. Because if you're going to put the hand tefillin deeper in, which means tomorrow when you're going to take out your tefillin, better. Today when you're going to go miftzayim, you're going to open up your bag. Which tefillin will be in front of you? If the head will be the closest to the opening, you're going to then pass over the head to come to the hand. Ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. Now, by the way, even though nowadays we don't have these narrow bags, but all the way in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, we put the tefillin shel yad on the left side of the bag, even though it's side by side. Because again, I'm a righty. For people that are righties, we're speaking. So, being that physically the right hand is on the side of the body, and when you extend your hand, it extends towards the center of your body, which means it's going a little bit towards left naturally. So if I'm going to extend my hand into my bag, my right hand will go towards the left side of my bag. There is where you place the tefillin shel yad. Why? Ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. And many apply the same thing for those of us, as we should, as the Rebbe wants every Yid now to wear Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. We put on the tefillin shel Rashi first. So in your tefillin bag or in your talis bag, the Rashi's tefillin should be to the left of the bag for the same concept, because of Ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. All of that is b'shem Rabbeinu Haygoyim. Scooting down another couple of lines, then Tosfos brings Rabbi Elyahu Zatzal, and he says another din, the le'ingen mishmush aidi, the chayiv adam lamashmesh b'tefillin kol shah. And indeed, that's our minig. Whether it is Pesachas Yodecha, whether when we speak about the tefillin, we are throughout the davening. There are times when we touch the hand and the head tefillin. And here is where Rav is saying, first touch the hand and then the head. Without ein mavirin ala mitzvahs, it's not related to the pasuk. You already bound the hand before the head. Actually, one might have thought that touch the head first. The head might be superior. That which is superior should take precedence. Of them Zakman, no. Ein mavirin ala mitzvahs, gewaldik. Let's come back over here. Now, continuing to explain the Seder of Abaya, right, who was Mesader. V'hatovas chamish neiros comes before the Damatomid. That is Shitas Aboshol. And the Damatomid comes before the Hatovas shtei neiros. So first of all, my tamon. What's the concept of interposing between these two with a step? And what is going to be the step to Damatomid? So Amar Abaye like this: Hahu baboiker the shnei gezirei eitzim to loy tzricha. Yes, we started today quoting the pasuk in Sav. Ubied olel hakoyin eitzim baboiker. That's a shnei gezirei eitzim. But also, as we already learned, that even if the Torah would not have written baboiker, when it comes to the putting on the two blocks of wood at the end on the Maracha Gedolah, we anyways would have placed it first. Why? Because machshir adif. Shumeitzim, or ultimately, as we said, that if you don't have the Maracha Shniya, you take it from the Shnei Gezirei Eitzim. Once we have the Svara, then even without the baboiker, we would put the Shnei Gezirei Eitzim before we would continue with the Dishum Mizbeach HaPnimi. So now those baboiker are extra. And now Chevra, this is beautiful, this midah that we just had recently, im eino le'ingen zeh, teneo le'ingen acher, or sometimes im eino le'ingen zeh, teneo le'ingen zeh. Listen, halt up. We're going to use the baboiker from the Shnei Gezirei Eitzim. We're going to lend a baboiker for one avodah and the other baboiker for another avodah. Please don't forget what we learned on Amud Aleph, Pasuk and Parshas Tetzava. There we also have baboiker. And even though the Torah there is seemingly speaking about the neiros, don't forget, it goes to everything. But we're speaking about the Dishum Mizbeach HaPnimi, it's speaking about the Ketores, and it's speaking about, it's speaking about Behitiva Yasaneiros. So now, says Zok the Gemara, beautiful. This is all Abaye's answer. Nachamol, since the babayker of Shnei Geziri Eitzim we don't need, as we explained in Amand Aleph, because Machshir already is Adif. So therefore, Shadino Lahacha. Where is the Hacha? We're going to take these two babaykers and we're going to lend each one to another step. Chad Shadyo Lahatavas Chamish Neiros. Now guys, Hatavas Chamish Neiros, the Hatavas Haneiros, and let's focus on the 5, already has 2 babaykers. So if it's going to now get another one, it's going to be 3 babaykers. And that is why it comes before the Dam HaTamid. Now hold on. By the Dam HaTamid itself, it says babayker already. Only 1 babayker. If you're going to give it a second one, so now Dam HaTamid has 2 babaykers. Hatavas Chamish Neiros has 3. Gewaltig. Dam HaTamid has 2. Let's read it inside. V'chad shadilo Dam HaTamid. So 3 and 2, 3 comes before 2. But let's keep on going. Now that you said that the Dam HaTamid, because you have this borrowed babayker that has 2 babaykers, the final 2 neiros doesn't get 3 babaykers. Because even though you gave 1 babayker to the Hatavas HaNeiros, it's used only for the Chamish. As we'll prove later, you got to separate them. So the final 2 only has 2 babaykers. The Dam HaTamid also has 2 babaykers. So now there is no scriptural advantage from one over the other, and now we'll see there's a svara that the Dam HaTamid should come before the Shtei Neiros. The Dam HaTamid will not come before the Hatavas Chamish Neiros, even though the svara will be there, because first comes what it's written. 3 babaykers against 2 babaykers. Everything is written out in the Gemara. Which will be why now the Nagmil Hatavas Neiros explains Abaye. Like we mentioned, the Hachin, now the Hachtavas Chamish Neiros, 2 of its own, 1 that it has from the Eitzim will have 3, and V'Hachin, the Dam, 1 of its own, the other babayker of the Eitzim, now it has 2, 3 is greater than 2, so 3 comes before 2. As we say, and that's why the Dam HaTamid will be before the Shtei Neiros, even though now look at the Psukim, Afagav the Hachitrei V'Hachitrei. So they're equal in scripture. Now you use Sfarim. Mechaper Adif. What's Mechaper the Dam? Beautiful. I have a kash on you now. I get it. But why are you giving the babayker from the Eitzim to the Menorah? Why don't you give it to the Dishon HaMizbeach? Ve'ema Chad Shadye L'Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi. That already has 2. Giving it 1 will make it 3. And that's why it will be before the Dam HaTamid. He's asking, why isn't the Seder the Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi, the Dam HaTamid, and only then the Menorah? The Hachet Losa v'Hachet Trei. And furthermore, V'chad Shad Dam HaTamid, and you're giving 1 to Dam HaTamid. So Dam HaTamid has 2. The Hatavas Chamish Neiros, if you're not giving any new babaykers, also has 2. 2 and 2. And we said that kapara now was adif. The nigdem latavas chamish neiros and aflagav the hachitrei. But didn't you just say mechaper adif? And so the seder should be that it should be dishum mizbeach hapnimi koidem ladam hatamid koidem lahatavas chamish neiros. So Abaye answers, first of all, logically you could have done that, but then I'll be stuck with a problem. And my problem is that I have to do an avoida between the 5 and the 2. And according to Abba Shol, Ketredes cannot be placed in between the 5 and the 2, because according to Abba Shol, Ketredes has to be after the 7. The only thing left is Dam HaTamid. Ein lo chabreiro. How are you going to be mafsikit? And Abaye is moida. Not everyone holds that you have to do an avoida in between the 5 and the 2. Actually, that's subject to a machlekes Reish Lakish and Abrechinen. So he's telling Rav Papa that the premise of your question is taka good according to Reish Lakish. Why do you separate the 5 and the 2 before the number? Like why not 4-3? Well, why not 6-1? The Gemara will explain. Why do you b'chlal separate it? Reish Lakish says, "Kedei lahargish kol ha'azara kula." It's to make it freilach. You're making a tumult. You divide the avoida. Avoida is beautiful, but if that's the only reason, you don't have to separate it with an avoida. You can do the 5. We did the 5, and then make a hefsek zman. Then taka shaper hasta gutakashe. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, I have an answer, because Rabbi Yochanan says, from where do we learn that you have to be machalik in the hatavas haneiros? From the fact that it says babayker twice in Tetzava. at the end of Tetzava. The Amri Baboiker means Chalkei L'Shnei Bekarim. And once it's based on scripture, it's much stronger. Then you have to do an avoida in between it. If you don't do an avoida in between it, then you are not machalik it properly. So there's no other option. If you are going to do teneu le'inyan achar to the dishum mizbeach hapnimi, which is why taka you would do the dam hatamid prior to the hatavas chamesh neiros, then there won't be anything separating the 5 and the 2. Muzmin zogin that am einlei inyan to the eitzim teneu to the hatavas neiros, and then everything works. Amalei Ravino Ravashi. Hi, the whole thing is based on it being superfluous. How is it superfluous? In other words, why don't we say that the baboiker is being used to teach us that the maracha rish gedoyla comes before the maracha shniya shal ketoides? The maracha shniya shal ketoides comes before the shnei gizrei eitzim. So the Gemara answers, Amalei, no, that we already know. No, we don't need the baboiker, like we just spoke out in the Rashi. Machshir adif. We would have known that you have to do the maracha yodayla, then you have to do the maracha shniya, then you have to do the shnei gizrei eitzim, and that comes before the hatavas, the dishum mizbeach, that we know. So im eino igen teneo ingen, to what ingen? Not to the dishun mizbeach, but to the dishun of the menorah. Gavaldik. Now we have to just understand, even according to Rabbi Yechanan, baboiker, chalkeu, divide the prep of the menorah. Why 5 and 2? Why not 2 and 5? That's the first. Ma'ishton david chamish neiros, and then bereisha, and then 2 navid hatavis shtei neiros bereisha. Ma'ila ma'kodesh. Start with the lower, and go to the higher. It says the Gemara, no. Once you begin kivin the aschel behu of druba, it's very similar to a machmitzin, right? To a mavirin ala mitzvahs. Once you begin, do as much as you could, and much as you could already answers automatically. Why don't we divide it 4 and 3? Why 4 and 3? Do the more the better. You have to leave something for the end, so leave the minimum to the end. The minimum to the end is 2. No, why not the minimum 1? The navid shit, do 6 and 1. Then you broke it into 2, but you did as much as you could in the beginning. So since it says beheitivoi es haneiros yaktireno, the ketores comes after the neiros. The ketores comes after the last 2, right? According to Abba Shol, that ketores comes at the end, and the last 2 is called in the plural neiros. Ve'ein neiros bechusais mishtayim. So all of these value rules, when you do things the moment you have an opportunity, do the most that you could. Really, you would do all 7. God doesn't want you to. Baboiker. Leave the minimum for the end. The minimum is plural, so leave 2 to the end, so you do 5 in the beginning. V'atovesh comes before the ketores, and indeed, why does Abba Shol hold so? Because since it says, and we keep on quoting this pasuk in Tetzava, that beheitivoi es haneiros yaktireno, Pashit, the Torah speaks about the neiros, and then it says yaktireno. The next step is ketores comes before the evarim. Why is that so? The Tanya, Yugdam Dover Shenema by Baboiker. What's the Baboiker? Baboiker is Ketores. Again in Tetzave. That should come before a step in the Avoida on which it only says 1 Boiker. The Dover Shaloi Nema Boy, Ela Boiker Echad Bilvad. Now hold on. By the Talmud there's only 1 Baboiker, right? It says in the Torah, Tasa Baboiker. Didn't we just say above Abaya that 1 baboiker from the Eitzim is given for the Dam HaTamid, so that it gives them 2 baboikers? So it's not 1. Rashi asked that question. Rashi answers, don't confuse Dam with the Eivarim. Dam has 2 baboikers. 1 of its own, 1 from the Eitzim. But you can't take something that's given for the Kapara part to all of it. So indeed, the Eivarim only has 1. So 2 is bigger than 1. The Eivarim comes before the Mincha. And why is that the Tanya? Nothing is placed on the prior before the Talmud Shol Shachar. How do you know that from? Talmud Loimar, on top of Daf Lamed Daled, the second Oleh in the pasuk that we began today's share with, V'arach Oleh pasuk and Sav Ha'oila. And like Rashi points out, the Ingansa word Ha'oila is extra, not only the Hey. Rashi says it could have says V'arach Oleh. Ha'oila, Rava says, V'amarava, Ha'oila, he Ha'oila Rishayna. Oila means that which goes up. That the oila means the animal goes first. So if you would bring the mincha before the evadim, now the mincha is burnt on the pyre. We don't burn the mincha on the pyre first. First, the animal is burnt on the pyre. This is so important. Because you have, the two parts of a korban, as the Alter Rebbe explains. You have the sacrifice part of the korban, and the animal has to be sacrificed, the lower part of the person, and then you have korban l'lashon kiruv. The godly part of the person has to be brought near, not sacrificed. What represents the animal, the behemoth? What represents the godly part of the person, dafka mincha? Not the mincha so'irim that we only have twice, right? The oimer and the soita. No, the wheat. Wheat is Michael Adam. So even though that maybe outside the Beis HaMikdash, first we tell a person, get close to God. And you'll be inspired to sacrifice the unholiness within the person in the Beis HaMikdash. First, you have to sacrifice the behemoth. The behemoth comes first. And then are we able to take the human part of the person, the Adam in the person, the godly in the person, and bring it even closer to God Almighty, to be continued.